Alrighty. So just so you know, I'm recording this and I'm going to be sending it to our backers because 12 o'clock on a Thursday is kind of hard for some people to show up at. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today for our second Dark Night of Our Soul screening and panel Q&A about a topic our team has been exploring for the last several years, which is post-traumatic growth. And I want to send out a special thank you to the Collingwood Foundry, who's hosting this in person at their co-working space. So if you're in Toronto and you want to visit that beautiful town, definitely check them out. They're a great community of makers, business owners, and creatives. And so a great place to go if you want to meet awesome, passionate people. So for any of you who don't know me, I'm Jessica DePazzi, and I'm one of the producers for this film, and I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas. So this morning I was considering how I wanted to kick this all off today, and I couldn't help but flash back to these strange and synchronistic moments in my life. Many times they were, I have to admit, unwanted, or they were perceived mistakes. Sometimes they were easy miracles, but most of the time they were hard left turns that threw me for a big loop. One of those moments was when my partner, Jeff DePazzi, was diagnosed with severe PTSD from his career in JTF2 as an assaulter and a sniper. Another one of those moments was when we were briefly brought into a Hollywood con artist scheme, which was actually a pretty funny story, but it was one of those weird things that also brings us here to make a film. And the others being how I met our team. Some of them you'll see here today. Our writer, Rick Alexander, he was a medic for the American Special Forces. And he realized around the time when I met him that his path was to be more of a soldier of truth-telling rather than, I guess you can say, slaying. And in his difficult transition period, we became allies to learn more about the challenges of the human experience. Zachariah Montgomery, who you'll meet, he's our director. He found us as he was seeking also allies to battle the stigma of mental health after his the unexpected passing of a sister. And I have many, many more stories like that, so I'll keep it short. But what I'm getting at is the challenges of life really brought all of us together so many years ago. And it wasn't until about 2019 when I realized what it was all for, when we all realized what it was all for. There was one topic, one phrase, one word really that was at the root of all of the challenges that were pulling at our heartstrings, and that's trauma. Whether that was from our own personal lives or observed in our close family units, or it was generational, or we were seeing it in our political systems. It happens to everyone. And as Anderson Todd says in the film, no one gets out of the parking lot without putting dents in the car. So we all set off on this mission to understand if there is a silver lining to trauma. If it has existed through time, there must be an evolutionary purpose to it. It's like, I don't know if this analogy makes sense, but it's like the appendix of the human experience, right? Like we want to cut it away only to realize that the thing does a lot more for us than we might realize. And so we really did believe that there must be a silver lining because we knew that all the difficulty of the past we were experiencing were huge parts of what made us the people we are today. And that brought us all together as a result of our hardships. We created beautiful connections, transformative projects were birthed, but most of all, we learned how to love each other, love ourselves in a more deeper and more meaningful way. So then the question then became, is post-traumatic growth something that is a phenomenon? Is it something that we've been privileged to experience, or can it be for everyone? And so that's really the purpose of this film you're going to see today. We set out to explore that question. We wanted to evolve the story of trauma, to explore the edges of what conventional wisdom might tell us we should do with that material. And so we wanted to seek out a series of experts and storytellers from widely different backgrounds and different socioeconomic upbringings. And all of these people, though, even though we're all very different, we have one through line in common. We have lived experiences of post-traumatic growth. And now we're dedicating our lives to help people understand how they may be able to embrace the challenges of life with more grace. And so we can create more farsight, more positive, lasting impact on future generations. All right, so thank you all for being here again. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna send you all a link through the chat box here. And we're gonna watch the film outside of Zoom so we don't have any lag or connection issues, and you can minimize the Zoom screen in the meantime. And we'll meet back here in 37 minutes when the film is finished. I'm even going to have a countdown timer here, so that'll give you an idea of when to come back. So if you finish early somehow, you'll know when we're coming back. And then we're going to start the panel Q&A. Okay. And then I guess the last thing is, as you're watching this short version of the film, just keep in mind that this is going to be eventually a 90-minute feature when we're finished. So what you're seeing is more of a sneak peek. So if you have any questions about what's said or brought up or what's coming up for you, please put it in the chat box, or you can just make note of it and we'll get to it during the Q&A. Great. Okay. So here is the chat link. Rick, give me a thumbs up if you see that. Okay, great. So you guys can open that link, minimize this screen, and I will meet you back here in 37 minutes. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Hi, Collingwood. Hope you enjoyed that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through a few people here that are on our crew just to give some quick introductions, and then we'll get into some questions. By the way, I hope you enjoy the film. Okay, so how about we start with Rick?
Hey friends, my name is Rick Alexander. I'm the writer of this film. And I spent 12 years in the military, and so former special operations combat medic, and got out to pursue a career in writing. Jess asked me recently in an interview, like why I chose trauma, and it feels a lot more like trauma chose me. And based on the life experience that I had and where I felt my interests going. And so to work on this project and to really try to deepen my understanding of what it means to live in an inherently traumatic world and how we can make new meaning out of that, really provided an opportunity for me to bring a lot of my disparate life experiences together, being in the military and being a writer. So maybe that's enough for now on me, but just to say that this project really did offer a culmination in a lot of things that are deeply important to me.
Beautiful. Thanks, Rick. Okay, let's go to our director, Luke Montgomery.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I'm a filmmaker based out of Toronto, sort of a jack of all trades, worked on many different projects in the last, bunch of years, but not anything that comes close to this is such a personal story for me. And, similarly to how Jessica and Rick explained that, it was something, and I think a lot of us feel this way, it was just something through all my experiences through childhood, young adulthood that I felt intuitively about. There's something more to this story, trauma and post-traumatic growth. I just didn't have the language for it. And so meeting all these people from different walks of life, different disciplines, just made this project feel so right to tell a full and clear big picture story on this project. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Luke. All right, let's head over to John. John from Canada.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was gone putting my kid down, so I missed the last probably 15 minutes. So I'm just wondering.
Oh, just introduce yourself. No worries.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so yeah, John from Canada, French Canadian. I served 12 years in the military, roughly 6 years in the police. Permanently restricted for serving in the uniform due to mental health. Wrote a book after that just to break the stigma around it and actually inform people. I have a small business called Wired Differently to keep veterans actually, or first responder or their family who suffer from it, from those mental health, keep them active, creating, and so on and so forth. And well, I'm a dad at home now, so that's much it.
Great. Thanks, John. Yeah, John is also helping us sponsor the Kickstarter that we're running right now, offering shirts for a very affordable cost for us so we can help fund this and provide some nice rewards for people. Okay, let's go to Collingwood. Jeff, do you have a mic?
I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me okay at this level? So I don't know where to look. I'm Jeffrey David DePazzi. I'm the producer of the film. I'm a lifelong seeker. I've always been a seeker of wisdom. I don't think I found any for myself yet. Wasn't until after I served in the Canadian Special Forces, our highest echelon. Afterwards, I developed severe PTSD and I went to my own dark night. And while I was down there, I did learn much. I learned the truth of why we suffer, I think. And I know that's a bold statement. It's an evolutionary gift that all of us house. In our DNA, in our epigenetics, in our childhood, and in our lives, we all experience it. But it's our job to transmute that as an individual. And I believe the reason we produce this is so that we can bring that message and we can begin to sort out collective issues. Because if we look at all collective issues, the root of it is us, our psychology. Every one of us, we're not guilty, we're not unguilty. We're just humans experiencing this delightful experience, right? So anyhow, that's me in a nutshell. This is me in a nutshell, but.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Well said. A nice mic drop at the end there. Would you hand that over to Matt?
Thank you, Jess, and Jeff, and all that are involved in this, Jen as well. Yeah, I've served in the Toronto Police Service for 13 years. I've since left that space to navigate my life in a different way, still in that space of service, trying to help guide and mentor other humans through some of their very difficult experiences. And when this family approached me to share my story, to and share my energy around my experiences and how I've chosen to embrace what those experiences, not just how they impacted me, but how I can not continuously feel tied down by them and removed from my emotional self. I spent better part of 2 decades in that space where I felt that restriction of not choosing to feel that vast range of feelings that we're capable of feeling. And I wanted to choose differently. And I want to support other humans who are seeking that for themselves. And being asked to contribute to this platform, this amazing project, and the edges that it can touch was something that was a hell yeah. Is that I think when we attach to something that is that feels that necessary or that important, then it was without a doubt. So thank you for doing this, you guys, and thanks for letting me tell my story.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. Do we have Jennifer in there? Does she want to? I know she's managing. Yeah, there we go.
Hey, I'm Jen. I run a coaching business. I was formerly in public health for 20 years, and that's a long time in public health. That's a lot of sad stories, illness, struggle, and I wanted to be part of something that had a different message, one of hope, one of strength, one of possibility, and that's exactly what post-traumatic growth does for us, and I want to share that with the world. Jess.
Great. Thank you so much, Collingwood team. Okay, so I'd like to start off the Q&A by heading over to Rick. Rick is someone who, when he commits to something, he puts his whole heart and soul into it. And he's like, I went to hell and back with this project. And so I wanted to kick it off with him to answer the question, why did we do this documentary? I know I started off with a bit of an intro, but that's my own perspective. Rick, where do you have to go with that? Why is this important today?
Yeah. Maybe we could start just by talking a little bit about the title, post-traumatic growth. So part of why I went to hell and back is because we're talking about terms that are very they're personal. There's a lot of energy behind them. They're touchy. There's a lot of baggage around the terminology, right? And so, if you were to go to 1,000 people on the street and have a conversation with them about the fact that life is inherently traumatizing and that they've perhaps experienced trauma themselves, a lot of people would just flat out reject that, right? And then part of that is because I think of the conversations that we've had around trauma, the way we've pathologized it, the way we've gone about talking about it. It's created a certain kind of baggage around it. But part of what we're doing here is we're saying that life is inherently difficult and that it is going to, it's interesting because most of the people here that have been talking today are like military, paramilitary. But when we interviewed people, we talked to people, I think 17, 23, I can't remember how many people we've interviewed. They're all in 3 to 6 hours each, right? So we've heard stories from people all around the world, very few of which actually are military/paramilitary. But the fact is that life, we're kind of putting this idea out there that life is inherently going to meet us in ways that are very difficult for us to grapple with. And if we pathologize the way we experience that difficulty, then I think that we end up in places like we are right now, where it is difficult to talk about and people deny it on principle rather than having a conversation about it. That's the traumatic idea. I've also said in a few different places that I actually have a struggle with the term PTG because I think we have a lot of baggage around the idea of growth too. We have an idea of growth that it's always linear and that it's always about progression, and it kind of turns into this thing where it's actually our mood that we're trying to get to grow and our feeling state. So I like to think about it more as a post-traumatic deepening, a deepening into what it means to be us, a way of approaching life and the things that have been inherently difficult for us to wrestle with, and using those experiences to gain a deeper insight about what it means to be us, and maybe even about what we're doing here. Uniquely and personally and individually. So, because I think sometimes our greatest gifts are, this is going to get cliche, but I think sometimes they really are hidden in these really difficult moments. If we can wrestle with them and reflect on them in the right way, they start to open for us in new ways. And that is what opens new possibility. So really what's important to me is that we start to have new conversations and better conversations, more expansive conversations about what it means to be in this human experience and how to deal with the things that make us feel stuck and make us feel fragmented. And so I think, maybe I'll just start, I'll leave it with there. Just the idea that if you were to go to all of the, again, 17 to 23, I can't remember the number of people that we interviewed, they all have different ideas they all have different ways that they've dealt with their personal trauma, and they have different ideas about what post-traumatic growth means. We on the production team actually all differ in very nuanced ways about what we think PTG is. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we talk about why is this an important conversation, because we're not striving toward a monotheism of consciousness. We're not striving toward everybody having one idea about what we're doing here. We're trying to open the fact that through multiple perspectives and through dialogue and through the way that we're trying to facilitate this conversation, that new insight, new growth, new deepening can be found in that experience, without us all having to agree on it, which is, I think something that is really lost in a lot of the public conversations we're having today. I think we're often striving to get everybody to agree, but here we're really just trying to have a wider conversation. So I hope that made sense. I'll leave it at that for now.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. Let me see. Actually, I'd like to pass this over to Collingwood. Jeff, would you add on to that? Why was this documentary important from your perspective?
It has a lot of importance to me. I've always been a man of service, even as a little guy. I was into service. I just didn't know what it meant. I didn't know how to do it. No one really actually taught me. I had good parents that they didn't really know how to nurture that. And over time, in my experiences, I realized, holy moly, most people are disconnected. They're disconnected from themselves and they're disconnected from others. We're 8 billion souls on this planet, and most people don't know their neighbor. That's because of fear. We're losing love, and that's a battle I don't want to lose. It's so important. It's such an emotional range. Rick was talking about, we use words like trauma and things, but to constrict down the toolbox that we have, our emotional range, our ability to think and heal and grow is the term we've kind of latched onto just because science has dubbed it post-traumatic growth. So I think it lands somewhere in there, Jess, because I kind of lost my train of thought.
Thanks, Jeff. That was good. Good call. All right. Yeah. As Rick was saying, one of the biggest challenges that we had in creating this narrative, other than having so much, let me just unmute you guys, having so much content to work with, was actually defining what is trauma, what is growth, even at the most basic sense. So what is trauma? Does anyone want to tackle that one?
The way we talk about it in the film is that we talk about an experiencing being traumatic when our capacity, I think you might remember this from the beginning of the film, when our capacity to, for our nervous system to regulate, but also for our capacity to be connected to the world around us, is overwhelmed to the point that we lose that capacity. But something that is really helpful in the conversation around trauma that we're hearing right now, and this rescues a bit of autonomy back from the event itself, is that when we talk about trauma, we aren't talking about the event itself. We're talking about the thing that happens in us as a result of having gone through that event. That's to include the meaning we make out of it, as well as what it does to our nervous system, right? We talk in the film about how everywhere we look, including our nervous systems, there's an idea of expansion and contraction, and that life is constantly doing that, that we're constantly doing that, and that both of these periods are necessary. But something happens when we go through an event that overwhelms our ability to maintain that regulation, and then this is even compounded when we can't talk about it, when, as somebody earlier mentioned, there's stigmas around it, when we start to go into sort of self-enclosure around it, we get stuck in that constriction, right? And the natural rhythm gets disrupted. So I think what we're talking about when we talk about trauma is the things that we go through in life, or the way that we respond to the things that we go through in life, that keep us from being able to maintain the natural rhythms that our body, that our lives are calling for, that we would normally live. I've landed somewhere around that, and I'm really open to other ideas of what trauma is. If anybody else has anything, but I think that's a place that we can start.
Great. I feel like I'm playing God right now because I'm just picking people to answer my questions. John, this is not usually how we do things, but we have a few of our panelists that weren't able to make it today. John, I also wanted to ask you that question around how you believe trauma is defined, because it is such a nuanced kind of term these days that holds a lot of weight and judgment.
So let's start with trauma. I think trauma is growth. This is part of the growth process, right? Like trauma becomes something else when it's not digested or swallowed properly. That's when we can talk about PTSD. But trauma is, you'll be traumatized for XYZ reason. Trauma is a spectrum as well, right? It depends how bad it affects you. It depends how you deal with it, and so on and so forth. But if you go through, let's call it like a challenge in life, can be traumatic, right? Because you have to make a decision, because you have to remove yourself from that comfortable zone. The human is so good at it. But when you get out of it, when you go in that uncomfortable zone, you have. Did you mute me? You're muted too.
Sorry, I was trying to mute someone else there. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I get it. I mean, it's the French accent. So, but yeah, so trauma is totally normal, right? It can be traumatizing for a teenager or a young adult to move out of home. It can be traumatizing for parents to see their nest being empty and now to have to relearn how to live without that or them. I think it becomes different when that trauma, that is, you lived it, you witnessed it, or you heard about it, right? Is not swallowed, is not processed. That's when it becomes a longer journey or the darkest night, because that darkest night is not technically 8 hours. That darkest night is a full-on change to your body that will come with that recovery, healing, and so on and so forth. You become someone different. You evolve. I've heard it from my wife saying, "I need to learn how to love you now. You're not the same person you used to be." Right? Uh, so it affects as well everyone around, right? And exponential as well. Now I don't know if I answered the question, but that's kind of what I had in mind.
You did, definitely. Thank you. Anderson Todd.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. And just wanted to interject and say that this giant teaser chunk of film is terrific, and I quite look forward to seeing the full scale version once that punches through. So, yeah, I wanted to say that. On the question of trauma, there's obviously it's a complex phenomenon, but one of the things that has attracted sort of my attention and research in the last bunch of years, my thinking about it is the way that trauma relates to trust specifically. So, if you think about trust in a certain way, trust is, being able to take information transparently, right? If you trust what somebody says, you can take what they say transparently. You don't have to spend a lot of time considering it, reflecting on it, judging it, weighting it. You just take it and act. And that's the kind of basic feeling that we have when we're operating with fluency, when we're in direct contact with the world. There's kind of fluency where we believe what we see. Now, if you consider cases where trust gets broken, right? So, you're a kid and your father says, yes, I'll come to your softball game this Saturday, and they don't show up. If that happens once, right, you might write it off. If it happens twice, you're going to be sort of vaguely disappointed. If it happens 5 times or something in a row, you just stop believing them. And if that trust is ruptured across enough situations with enough people and early enough in your life, then it gradually becomes the case that it's not just individuals or categories of individuals that you stop being able to trust and treat transparently. It's your own modeling capacities, your own ability to perceive the world. You start to doubt everything you're experiencing. And that's the moment where you start to verge into some of these deeper and more disruptive and unpleasant forms of dissociation, right? Depersonalization and derealization, right? The world doesn't feel quite real. I don't feel quite real. I don't feel integrated and fluent. I'm not able to make contact. There are pieces of me that are disconnected and so on and so forth. So, there's a huge part of the piece around trauma, I think, that relates to this. And that, I think, actually is one of the reasons why the kind of intentional self-development that you can see, right, the idea of intentionally entering this, right, makes such a difference. When your intention is involved, the fact that you're about to have such a powerful experience is necessarily wrapped together with a kind of trust that you're granting it that can provide a sort of, guide wire that allows you to go through something, much as it might in, say, the context of initiation or something, right? Where you're going, you're getting cut or covered in fire ants, or you're running through the dark, or whatever your particular cultural tradition tends to be. And of course, we don't have that. North America's lost it. All we've got for initiation is like, I don't know, throwing a hat, losing your virginity, drinking, and maybe driving a car. Well, that's it, right? So the whole framework that we have for intentionally entering into something that might be highly disruptive, but in a trusting way, is largely broken. So that's one of the main ways that I think about it. And in that context, I think The sort of thing that you're talking about with post-traumatic growth. As I often say, it's a completely different thing to intentionally walk into the cave than to be, waltzing along the path and get pounced on by a tiger out of the bushes in the rain. The way that you process that experience will be very different. So, yeah. I have to go, unfortunately. But
Thank you for popping in.
Yeah, I wanted to add that, and I'll actually try to make it to the next session as well, because that one is in the evening. But I just wanted to say this is terrific work, all of you who worked on it, and it's been such a pleasure and a privilege to be involved in this project. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anderson. See you around. Alrighty. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment. Let me just spotlight myself. Okay. So one of the considerations we have as we're talking about post-traumatic growth and even intentionally facilitating it is that this may be a privilege, something that's privileged for people that have, quote, easy lives. So Rick, I'd like to start with you on this one. And let me see if I can frame this question in a way that makes sense, because it's just sort of happening in my head here. How is this an option for everyone? People do ice baths, they climb mountains, they have the privilege to do these hard things on purpose so that they can prepare themselves in what we're proposing for the challenges of life. Now, there are some people whose lives are inherently very, very hard already. How do we work with all of these kinds of people in this theory that we're talking about?
Just to clarify, is the question, how could PTG become available to everyone?
Yes. And I also want to throw in there the go hard or go home culture. That's one of the tensions around that, is that to put yourself into challenging situations is a privilege intentionally. So how can somebody else who's watching this also relate to something like that?
This is a hard question because I don't know. I don't know if it's available to everyone. And the reason I say that is because if you are still in the experience that is inherently unsafe, that is still fracturing your trust with reality itself, to think that it's just very hard to get enough space to integrate any of that and to grow from it. There's too much turbulence and there's too much chaos. Now, that being said, the things that can give us enough of a platform and enough of a foundation, psychologically speaking, to start rebuilding that trust are also very minimal. For example, any kind of dialogical relationship where I'm in dialogue with something, even myself, which is a very interesting thing. I can journal. I can actually journal with other parts of myself, parts that are scared and parts that aren't. I can journal them and I can start to create new knowledge out of that dialogue. Also, too, I can talk to other people, right? I can talk to people, and this is maybe one of the most difficult with us, because as you mentioned, this go hard or go home culture that we have, there's this idea of being self-made in our culture that's very important, of just being the one that puts it on your back and gets it done no matter what. And it's just it's such bullshit, because that's not how life is. And we're all very dependent on people and all very dependent on other things. And so anyway, if we can get past that mentality and we can reach out and have conversations with people about these things, another person can create the safety for reflection to start, right? And that reflection is very important, because this is the gift of being human, right? My dog sitting right here, my pup, isn't exactly aware of the fact that he's going to die, right? But I am. I can reflect on that. I can reflect on what that means to be true. And so I think that one of the ways that this starts to become available for everybody is just by us realizing that we have the capacity to do this. It's human. We have the capacity to grow from these things. We have this new scientific name for it, but as the film explores, and this is a very interesting thing that I had a professor working on who was helping me understand this, that every time there's a fracture in a culture, something massive happens, we always see 20 to 50 years later, we see this new expansion in consciousness. We see a new way of relating to religion. Usually it's a mystical kind of religion that will explode on the wake of this thing happening. So I say that to say these are very natural human things. And I think that part of what we're doing here is trying to open up roads that get us back into our humanity. Not having to be a machine. The go hard or go home culture says I can turn myself into a machine. I'm saying, no, you can be what you are, and that's doable. And we can do that together. And if we can have the right conversations, we can reflect on our experience. And this is what I mean about us. When you're in the experience, it's very hard. But the beauty of being human is that we can pull ourselves out of it at the same time that we're in it, even sometimes, depending. If it's too unsafe, that's not possible. But we can be experiencing something and simultaneously reflecting on what it's like to experience that thing. And as we do that, with another person who models to us that it's safe enough to do that, we start to build our own capacity to be with these experiences. So I know I'm rambling because I'm kind of talking through it as you asked me, but I really think it has a lot to do with dialogue and with reflective capacity and with finding places that make that possible. Again, you can get a journal for pretty cheap, like where this process can start. You can find other people that can talk about this stuff. You can watch films like this that open it up for you and make it open up new possibilities. So I don't know if there's a catch-all answer, but I think there's a very nuanced answer and a lot of threads for us to follow there.
Thank you, Rick. As you were talking there, I was thinking about the healthcare system. And as we go to meet with people that can help us make sense of things, we often will go to our physicians or someone like that. So I wanted to pass this over to Jennifer. Jen, if you could chat a bit about what you've experienced in the healthcare system and how educators and physicians might be able to use this material to help their own patients.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to, before we get into that question and answer, Jess, I just wanted to say, piggybacking on what Rick was explaining there, I think it's really important for people to have language of the possibility of growth after trauma. I think we are very short on that narrative right now. And before you buy a journal, you have to know that something's possible for you, that somewhere out there, something can happen for you so that you can then take the step in that direction. And to further on that, especially in the healthcare system where people are turning for help, it is having the language in those spaces as well. I remember walking from the physical health end of my office. I work with 45 allied healthcare providers, and walking to the mental health care providers and asking them about post-traumatic growth and being met with, "Oh, I've never heard that." And not to say that they didn't know and they weren't working at advancing people's health and healing, but even that terminology wasn't readily available. It was masked in CBD programming and the newest course and the newest training. And I think that if we could be more explicit and open and obvious with some of this language, it would be far more accessible for people.
Great, thank you. Okay, my last question to the panel before we get into any questions y'all have is, let me just get oh my God, technology, is what do we do about it? Okay, so that has been one of the big questions around this whole message is like, okay, I believe that post-traumatic growth is possible for me and for probably everyone. What do I do? And so, Rick, sorry, I'm picking on you so much today, but you have a really interesting way of answering this.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah. So what do we do? Like, what is the solution? How does someone experience post-traumatic growth? What is the step-by-step process, right? That we all like to have.
Is this a trick question?
It is a trick question because you say the opposite.
Okay. I feel like I'm being something I don't, yeah. I think it's important to recognize something that I said earlier, which is that, like, me from the psychological perspective, spend a lot of time contemplating that. There's a lot of the people in the interviews, that have answered how they've personally made meaning out of their experiences that, like, we wrestle with a little bit because, some of what I said to the group is like, I would never give this advice. I would never give this advice to people. And yet it's been profoundly impactful for certain people, you know, to move them along in their life and to help them make meaning and wrestle with things. The thing about this is that we can, part of what in the film we do is we look at patterns. You know, we look at the patterns of expansion and contraction. We look at the patterns of the way that when symmetry is fractured, it creates a new complexity, which you could think about like yourself, right? Because you are a very complex organism. In fact, the mind is so complex, we can't recreate it. Even though AI is getting close, it's not actually. It's getting close at mimicking it, but it's not getting close at recreating the actual complexity. But then you get met with something that fractures that symmetry, that fractures you in a very profound way. And Anderson Todd does a good job in the film of talking about how what happens when a complex system encounters something like that is that it first gets jarred by it, and then it does a good job of reorganizing itself in a more complex manner to now account for that, right? You could think about that as the expansion of consciousness. That's a pattern. That's a pattern that we see all over the place. We see it we try to make a case for, we see it in the very foundations of the physical world, and we see it in psyche, right? And we're also looking at patterns of the hero's journey, right? These structures of transformation and how people go through turbulent times and come out on the other side. So it's interesting because part of what we're doing is we're opening up the conversation to say there are patterns for this everywhere. At the same time, the way that you uniquely experience it and the way that you make meaning out of it and work through a traumatic experience is going to be profoundly unique for you as an individual, and that there is no one way to get through this, which is part of why I have so much trouble with the way we're currently working with trauma. Right? Because right now it's a line item in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. And what happens is once you get diagnosed with that line item, you then become that. And we have a certain step-by-step process of how to treat that line item in the DSM. Unfortunately, you're not a line, or not unfortunately, fortunately, you're not a line item. You're a very complex individual. And so all of that to say, there is no one size fits all. There is no step-by-step process for post-traumatic growth. This is my say. Other people might have a different opinion of this, of course. But there are patterns. There are ways that we can see that it does happen. And if we can become conscious of those patterns, we can start to participate in them, which is important, because typically we're gripped by these things and it's more like they're living us than we're living them.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Jeff, from a physiological standpoint, what are some things that people can do to set them up for success after traumatic experiences, or to even resolve them far afterwards?
So, you know, Rick mentioned 23 interviews. It was 27 interviews, and we sat down with some of the best minds there are. And, you know, Rick is talking about a high level, you know, mostly upper cerebral cortex kind of view of this, looking at it from that pattern. There are things on the physiological level that we can do two things with. We can stress them so you can adapt, or we can nurture them so they move out of those stress states and then you adapt. If I take water away from any of use for 3 days, what's going to happen? You're going to have some troubles, right? Your body's going to start shutting down. So it's probably not going to make too much meaning out of the psychological trauma you got. If I sleep deprive you for a week, your consciousness is going to alter. It's going to start moving down and it's impacting your epigenetics, the control elements on your DNA. The way we talk, how we interact. Right now, I'm sending mechanical waves into your brain and quantum processes are happening and they're shifting you a little bit. They're running through all kinds of filters. The food we eat, we see it all the time. If you eat Twinkies, and only Twinkies, your body, all these things impact your psychology, right? They're one and the same. So all that to get at a very Maslowian approach, boom, throw up the triangle and let's help each other meet. It's insane that there's 2.5 billion hungry bellies in the world. Breaks my heart. It's crazy because they will not actualize most likely. They may have deep revelations in their near-death experience, but until we do that, you know, base needs. And then we know already from there, it's more complex than a Maslowian pyramid, of course, but love and belonging, self-esteem. It's very hard to reach high self-esteem in an insecure world. You know, all these things fluctuate and create insecurities. Being a little bit cold in a room starts, and there's a lot of these. We use the word consciousness. It's feedback loops that we can handle. The environment gives me billions of them right now. My trillions of cells are constantly in these feedback loops, but we are starting to get aware of these things. A very easy button though, we notice it doesn't matter if you go for ketamine treatment or any kind of plant medicine or therapies or whatnot. You do this one thing, you action, and then you talk to another human. You'll never resolve reality purely on your own. You have to go inwards, like Matt said in the interview. You do. You have to quiet the mind. But it's together we make this possible. And right now there's a defense mechanism about it. Maybe a denial, maybe fear. I don't know what it is. That's why we really are kind of mentioning the conversation, the dialogue. And that's why all of us put ourselves into really vulnerable states to do this. And we expose and lay it out, not because we want to show dirty laundry, but that's how we begin to say, oh yeah, okay, me exposing my vulnerabilities is actually a strength, because then I can resolve them. And Matt, you're such an example of that, buddy. Really and truly.
Thanks, guys. All right. Do we have any questions from everyone else?
Can I have a minute for the public?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Just the not so statistical, the interpretation from the practice of colonial medicine in the Western world of what PTG is, and just from a more holistic approach and looking inward on that created narrative of cultural differences, from socioeconomic status to the whole thing where the economic gaps exist in understanding, that creates that uneven flow or ripples in the water, that kind of reflect as they bounce off the shore and come back to us. That I'm really glad to be a part of this, Jeff. Thanks, to open up on some of the experiences and articulate it to that holistic earthly approach, with a really good understanding of all of that realm. And I'm happy to be engaged in that meaningful conversion or of evolution, moving forward, away from the negativity and into the positives, in the sunshine out the window. I like that. That's where I want to be. So I just wanted to say thanks for the invite, and I'm happy to support you. I know $10 isn't very much.
Oh, it's perfect. Thank you. It means a lot to us. Thank you.
Hey, Jess, can I just say something on that from Chris? Yeah, one, thank you. Two, the next documentary that we're already working out the contracts for is kind of going to begin to look at that. I don't want to get too ahead of that pack, but the idea is that trauma is trauma, right? And, it's relative, it's acute, it's chronic, but it's across the board. And that, yes, lots of people, like, how much resources do you need? At what point are you just, being insecure and then hoarding? And that's creating those imbalances potentially, because we're more of an inductive approach where we don't really want to drive an opinion, but we're looking at that, Chris, in a way. Thank you.
Frame for everyone. Well, the comment first, just as a mental fitness writer and practitioner, someone working on a doc myself, I just commend and congratulate all of you for dedicating your time and energy to this incredibly important topic. So congrats. And just no open door policy too. I do have a show podcast in this space that if you want to time a release for funding or the release of the actual doc, wide open door for anyone. My question though is kind of out of excitement, like what can we expect from a daily kind of practical tools perspective that any one of us can use to see like kind of how people are handling that growth?
I guess I will take this. So you can imagine along this track, a lot of questions. We're talking about consciousness. Nobody really knows what it is, but we've begun to collate and correlate that with some things, given it's, you know, maybe not causation, but at least correlation, and being able to track that and metric it. Because right now, most people are left brain users and we like linear thought. We work very good. Like, I'm going to go outside in the road. I'm going to turn this way and walk this way. And then it's like, you know, like, but we're actually very abstract with our right minds. We just don't know how to bring that into our language patterns yet. That's paradoxical thinking. It's hard to have a truly paradoxical conversation. One of the things that this is going to point to is what we call the Art of Adversity program. And it'll be, we're going to do everything we can to raise money and generate the impact that anybody can go to these programs and join the communities. So that's part of the tools we want to bring, because you can imagine we could make a 20-part series on just how to breathe and the importance of breath, let alone what to eat. And you know what I mean? Like, and then we get into the more existential topics of what it means to be a human. And then you can even balloon that out to everything in our environment impacts it. The way we construct things, you know, we move things around, those have impacts. And that's a whole other discussion. So we couldn't jam that into an hour and a half. We tried. It was funny looking. But yeah, so at the end, it'll point to that. And we're going to make those resources more available for more people. And the understanding is this, though. It's not for just the downtrodden, as we like to say, you know, like people that we always sit in a master servant role. We do this naturally with our consciousness, and we'll automatically put hierarchy as part of our chimp brain. You know, we don't mean to do it, but it's for everybody on that spectrum. You know what I mean? And then it'll be like for someone who's in a good place, whatever that is, can help other people, you know, and then create this chain reaction. I think it's called nuclear fission.
I just wanted to add really quickly to that, to answer Mark's question about like, what's next? What can you stay tuned for? So Art Adversity is a big piece of that. And right now we're doing a lot of outreach to find partners who share the message in their own unique way so that we can build a social impact campaign. Yeah, so that's in development. Yay, you're signed up. Thank you. Thank you.
So that is actually a really good way to close, because we're meeting with a social impact agency next month to help us figure out how we can work with people like you, Mark. We've gotten a really great response from a lot of practitioners in the healing space, whether they're educators, even podcasters, or therapists. All kinds of people are like, look, I have dedicated my life to post-traumatic growth. I didn't know the name for it. Now that I know, I want to be a part of this. We are a solution agnostic organization, because the way that all of us have navigated our own traumas varies quite a bit. So to say breath work works for one person, I mean, it probably works for everybody, but you know, to say that going to a Reiki person or getting your tarot cards read, that can be really, really healing for people that could subscribe to that kind of culture. And to somebody else, that can make things a lot worse and a lot more confusing, right? So we do want to expand this to house a bunch of different practitioners and eventually create a nonprofit so that we can get funding, so that it's not dependent on someone's resources in the way that they can work with these practitioners. So on that, I feel like we're good to go. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to releasing this as soon as possible. We're hoping for the end of October. And what we're looking for now is just to spread the word. You know, we're running this Kickstarter, and funding has been slow, but it's coming in. Miracles come in here and there, and we're feeling it. And so this is all a new process for us as well. So thank you for your kind words, your support. And yeah, if there's anything that you'd like to ask us, you can always send me an email, which I think you all have. So you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and thanks for spending these hours with us. Bye, team.